and thanks for your time today. And congratulations on your host. I just watched the film earlier today, and it's a lot of fun. It's gruesome, it's gory, it's terrifying, but I think it's a really great instance of horror cinema. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about it.
Cool, thanks.
So I just kind of wanted to start our kind of conversation today with the first moments of you kind of discovering this character and this opportunity to play it, because you've tackled characters like this before in your filmography, like Freddy Krueger, for example. So I was wondering, when you first kind of got the script, what was it that stuck out to you about the film and the character that made you kind of want to sign on and play it?
This one seemed like really challenging. Um, from the standpoint of there's definitely a much different embodiment to this character than other characters I played. I played, a lot of unhinged, nutters. But this guy kind of seems to be even pushed farther to the edge. There's his insanity is, I think, more apparent. Um, he's a guy that was I think kind of, living a dream life as a game show host where I think he was just felt super fortunate, to have this lovely wife and kid and to have this game show that he had been part of for decades where I really feel that he felt that he was lucky and you know to be able to live this life and to have these game show contestants come on where he can kind of change their life or put a little sunshine in their life by being part of this great game show while also giving them a 7 day all paid trip to Cancun or a car or washer and dryer or with kitchen redo or whatever it is. And I think when his life got turned upside down and he lost everything. He just snapped in such a way that was, I mean, just visceral. And I think what's really interesting about this character to me is that there's two sides to him. There's your host, where he's driven by this revenge. He's driven by what he feels is right and wrong. He's there's such a darkness to him, such a hatred to him, such a need for these guys to figure out to learn how wrong they've been and how they've ruined his life. But he's also got this, there's still Barry Miller that's kind of, underneath, that he's pushed down that bubbles up and I think conflicts with the host. Yeah, I kind of found it a fascinating thing to kind of to play with. I also found it really challenging that it was, there's almost like a theatrical quality to the movie in the sense that there's just a ton of dialogue and that this character really needed to drive this movie in a compelling way. And so that really was incredibly scary to like, oh shit, can I pull this off? So it just felt like a challenge. I had to try to dig in there and study those scenes, look for this character's truth and live in those moments in such a way. And then I was really, obviously blessed to work with such a quality cast of amazing, actors and stuff.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you touched on dialogue and things like that as well, because I think, despite the physical torture of the game show and that aspect of it too, the difference I think between Barry's approach and other similar characters we may kind of see in films like this is that, he uses intimidation, dangling false hope, taunting, and methods like that to subject them to mental torture as well as physical. And I was wondering, when you kind of navigate that twisted psychology that you've touched on, how do you kind of channel that through dialogue and your chemistry with the other cast?
I think, to challenge it, it's all about like intent, and it's there's I mean that's a great question. It's really just about being present, being in that moment, really kind of you know studying all of that stuff, thinking about it, working on it, making sure that, all of the technical things, making sure that the dialogue's embedded, but then being present in that moment and knowing what you're meaning and knowing what the intent is and knowing what the truth of the moment is, because this character's obviously gone to great lengths to put all of this stuff together, to create this stage, to create this moment, and then to kind of try to navigate the wacko thought process that's going on, but with this, hard meaning intent that's driving it. But there's a part of him that's almost like seeking. He's definitely seeking this retribution and seeking this kind of revenge, but it's kind of deeper than that. It's like they need to know, the degree to which they've ruined this guy, that they've turned him into the opposite of what he had spent so many years doing. But there's also a bit of this guy, part of what's driving him too, and this part of this just wacky disconnect and all of these thought processes that are kind of going on in his brain, that he's also still kind of seeking his old glory of being a game show host, with his cameras, with his mannequin audience. And to him, there's this reality that this is like a real show that he's also putting on at the same time. I think he's aware that it's not, but there's a big piece of him that think this is real and we're on, and they love me, and he's just kind of flipped the whole, it's almost hard to get at. It's almost hard to describe as much as, just figuring out a way to kind of embody all of that, to somehow put that in there, to have the Barry Miller kind of underneath character that's been pushed down, kind of pushing against this crazy mad dude. And the guy's just gone nuts. So it's kind of like, to channel it, it's kind of this balance between a truthful intent while also balancing and embodying this psychotic thought process. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that psychotic aspect of him that you talk about, I think it really comes through in your acting, but also kind of as you mentioned, there's this immersive set around him as well of the game show and the contraptions that he's put together. But also, probably what was most interesting for me as a viewer was his physical appearance in the film, the costume and the mask in particular. I think they really work well to serve that kind of dual nature of him, if you will. So I was wondering, kind of symbolically speaking, what does that kind of mean to you to have those costumes and props and things like that? And how do they kind of help you channel that atmosphere as well?
Well, I think it kind of gets to the, I think his suit, is definitely reminiscent of the suits that he wore when he was doing his game show. Um, and I think to him that's almost like, when he puts that on, he's Barry Miller again, in his mind. And I think the mask kind of embodies, first off, it covers up the scars that he's been placing on his face for every time he's exacted a kill or taken revenge. And I think the scars themselves, I think, this isn't in the film, but I do believe like the very first one that he did was the thing that said point of no return. I think that, when you are a game show host and that your life has been flipped upside down, I think a lot of when everything kind of gets flipped upside down, you kind of hope that, over time I could get this back, that it's, whatever it is. But, I think when he first cut his face, that meant there's no turning back, because you're never going to be a game show host with the cut face, and I think so the mask kind of helps to just cut to cover those cuts, so that in the moment of putting on his game show there, it's something that you can't see. Um, so that's kind of what was driving me for that.
I think when he puts that mask on and he slips into that character, so to speak, it really comes through at its most in these moments of kind of impulsivity and high adrenaline. He really thrives off of what he's doing and what's driving him forward. And I was just wondering, from an actor's perspective, how much kind of freedom did you have to kind of explore and improvise different ways that could manifest as opposed to what was written in the script?
The what do you mean? You
So
mean from an ad-libbing standpoint,
yeah,
or
like ad-libbing and certain physical movements as well as the plot intensifies and things like that.
we DW was great with that. We did a lot of exploration, and DW was good of making sure that, sometimes some things might veer a little bit and he would kind of need a certain thing. But a lot of times it was also like, I'm a big fan for doing kind of multiple takes in a row. Even a lot of these scenes were long, man. There was a couple times where it was like, I forget, it seemed like it was a 12 or 15-minute scene that, of rolling and just not stopping. And obviously there's a bunch of different angles, but what we really did a lot of was multiple takes in a row, then talk about it, then do multiple takes again. And to me, it was really important to do kind of what you just said, of almost just like letting each thing just kind of, travel and be different, and as opposed to just trying to nail something a specific sort of way. I mean, it's like, you kind of have to do what the blocking needs to be, I think, to a degree. But sometimes there's ad-libbing around that because we got, great photographers and people that could follow you and stuff. But that's, I think, to really keep it kind of fresh and real, it was important that every time there was action, that you just, you attack a scene and let stuff kind of come out different, and different thoughts occur to you as your nutty mind is trying to think the thoughts of what the character's thinking in that moment. So in other words, to try to keep it from getting rote, of just like doing it the same way every time. We were traveling all over the place, and then they went in there and, cut the heck out of it to create the performance that lives in the film.
That's awesome, Jackie. Thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours about a character like this, but we've literally got less than a minute left. So I'll very quickly ask you one final question. The film premieres at Fright Fest. It's a great place for that to be. What are you most excited for audiences to take away?
I don't know. I'm just excited to be kind of going to Fright Fest. I've never been there. I'm definitely excited to get a sense of, how the audience feels about the film. Um, and I hope they dig it, and I hope that they can. I hope that there is something about this wacky, your host slash Barry Miller character that it's a really wacky, batshit crazy character.